Joe Murphy, thank you very much for coming on the In L&D podcast.
Gary, pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on.
Do you mind, like we do every episode, kicking us off by completing that sentence, please?
Yeah, sure. So in L&D, there's a lot of things that I think about within in L&D, but I fundamentally, in terms of philosophy and approach, I believe that it can be summarized, certainly in a facilitation approach, be summed up with a three-pronged approach. Three words, simply knowledge, confidence, and momentum. I think if you hit all three of those, that's the real sweet spot of, real lasting change, both information-wise and behaviourally.
Knowledge, confidence, momentum. Love it. Do you mind running us through those three steps and then we'll maybe come back and just chat about each one in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. Like high level then. So in that order, it's I suppose it that would go naturally in that order. So whether it's an onboarding of a new staff member, if it's an existing member starting and joining an existing workflow, I always think it obviously starts with the knowledge, getting your ducks right, and I arguably think out of those three sections, knowledge, confidence, momentum, knowledge is probably the most simplistic. There's less going on compared to the confidence and the momentum. There's maybe more nuances, more people management and more personal management and emotional
Mhm.
intelligence may be more required on the other two factors. With knowledge, really, I think it's just your execution as a facilitator, and it's having simple conversations, reading the room, as opposed to it being theory, it needs to be more agile, test and learn. So I'm going to drop a little bit of theory to you, but now we're going to practically apply it. I think that's the way it's going anyway. And I've been on your pod, well, sorry, I've watched your pod recently, and I think it's nothing new that people talk about TikTok a lot,
Yeah.
and that drip fed approach, and do we have the attention spans of what we had previously? I think there's a bit of a debate in that world as well, whether humans do still have a short participation span or attention span. But either way, the knowledge, I think it's about making it bite sized enough for it to be digestible. And I think the practical way of going about that is here's the theory, here's the what, the how, and crucially, the why behind it. And now let's give you an opportunity to apply that. And it's really just doing that cycle every single time throughout the training, as opposed to theory, and then a bit of practical at the end. I think that's really the sweet spot with the knowledge side of it, of how I look at it.
Yeah.
And that leads on to confidence. With doing that repetitive action of testing and applying, and not just overloading the knowledge and the theory, naturally the learner, and you as the facilitator, I guess, but it is ultimately about the learner, they build that self-belief. That they actually realize they can do it. It's not that it's just theory going in and then I've got to worry about testing if I've got it after the session. Actually, I'm doing it in real time and I'm getting feedback from the facilitator, but I'm realizing with my own existing thought process, this new knowledge that I'm being taught is actually going somewhere. So that confidence causes a compounding effect, right, in sessions, that if they have the confidence, they're even more engaged and will listen to even more of the new knowledge that you're going to drip feed through to them.
Mm.
And with that, the momentum comes in where now not only have they had knowledge and they're realizing it and it's being absorbed in a drip fed way, they've built the confidence that they can see that it actually can be applied, and I'll fine tune it maybe after the session, but I've started with a base and now I'm going to build from here. And that naturally builds momentum, that you leave the classroom thinking, you know what, I have seen something from that. I'm going to continue with the support of the people around me. And I think that's what I always feel. The practical element, I can't stress enough, is so important in learning. It's probably a pretty general and sweeping statement, that of course it is, but I just don't hear that word enough, momentum, in
Mm.
classrooms. And I pay homage and just a lot of focus to it, that if you get the knowledge right, it builds the confidence. And as a result of that, it gives that learner the momentum to take and make the journey themselves their own when they leave the classroom.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And believe it or not, that is it encapsulated in a few thoughts. I could go even further, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's the thing with knowledge, right? It's the thing with the audience and all that psychoanalytical stuff. You can go so much into it, but I
Yeah.
have tried to keep that as sweet as I can,
Yeah.
or sorry,
But
as short as I can.
yeah, no, because we'll pick it apart a bit now
Yeah,
anyway. But I really agree with that. They're kind of layers, aren't they? A lot of the time when I see stuff that works in L&D, in marketing, it's a layered approach, because one thing can't happen without, unless that first thing's there, the next thing won't
yeah,
happen, and the thing after that won't happen. So maybe if we start with knowledge, um, you made a good point around it's not just about the information itself. It's about kind of the delivery, what makes it memorable to people, not just about how you teach it, but like what is allowing that to be absorbed by people and stick with them. So, you know, what are some of the ways that we can make sure knowledge is sticking with people, the way we deliver it, is manageable, and then sets us up to for an environment where we can build confidence, we can test it, we can then use that confidence to build momentum?
Yeah, so really, again, a really good question. You could unpack it in so many different ways, but I'll try to, keep it, succinct to the point, because that's always my facilitation style, ironically, anyway. I think from a facilitation element, for it to stick, it's got to be relatable, and I think you've got to deliver in a way where, and relatable, yes, very general statement, I'm aware, but where it's relatable, it's if I'm giving you scenarios, this is what I mean, and it's how it's relatable to your role, or how you're going to use it. It should be general in a certain state, but it also should be, look, I'm going to give you practical examples of how you would apply it. I think people get taught the how and the what to do it, but fundamentally I think a lot of what knowledge lacks when people don't actually make any changes, they're not told why it's going to benefit them or why it helps the people. And it's something that I use, when I'm doing my current role, when I'm working with businesses and I'm working with learners, when I'm doing, if you're in a role where you speak to customers, what is it, the customer, business, yeah, the ABC rule is what I think. So if I'm talking to the agent that I'm delivering the training to, I'm going to say, this is how it helps you and why it helps you, and think ABC. The agent level, this is how it helps you in your role. The B is the business. This is the wider business impact and how it's going to help you, but the business in general. And the C is the customer, the person that you're speaking to. So think of it from all three parts. I think if you create that awareness to someone that you're teaching, they can see the bigger picture, and that means that they actually take in the knowledge because they can see a whole round holistic view of what you're actually teaching them. You're not trying to go at it from just one particular avenue. I think if you give the big picture, that's what helps resonate it. But yeah, that's one way. And again, it goes back to making it relatable. But I don't think people are inherently selfish. That's not what I'm going with this. But I think you just have to make it so clear what is in it for you. What's the carrot and what's the stick, as to if you take this knowledge on, I'm going to show you how to apply it. I'm going to show you what it is. But if I show you why it's going to help you and why it helps the other people in the conversation, the business, the customer, as I mentioned a minute ago, that activates the brain, I think, in so many other ways to the learner. It's not just that you're talking to them about knowledge, you're actually showing them, I'm asking for a behaviour change, but this is the win for you by doing that.
Yeah.
I think that's the incentive. So the knowledge aspect and how you actually transform it is just dropping that incentive into the actual knowledge that you're delivering.
Yeah, I can imagine that makes it easier to break down any knowledge into smaller and easier to understand sections. If up front the context is this is ABC, agent, business, customer.
Yeah.
The knowledge that we're going to go through now, this is how it relates to an agent, for example. We can break it down step by step.
Yeah, very absolutely that. Yeah, you can compartmentalize it. You can break up the activity, and from my side, it helps me facilitate in that way that I want to go, where it's that agile approach. I've done I have had a bit of background in agile and lean and operational excellence, so there's a bit of that going in from my background. But I've always been a believer of test and learn, test and iterate. Don't plan, and then execute. The way to know the progress is there is to be able to constantly apply it throughout. I know you certainly need a certain level of base theory to start to go to that place, but we shouldn't over theorize it before you get to practical. And yeah, with that approach, with me breaking it up, it helps me compartmentalize that approach, where let's focus on this point, minor bit of theory, let's apply it. Let's focus on this and apply it, and just go round in circles. And that repetition, we always say in L&D that repetition is what is actually going to force actual behaviour change, because you're applying it. Why not do that in the classroom? Don't just rely on when someone leaves the classroom. Really emphasise that whilst in the training room.
Can imagine that will help with other learning experiences as well. If you're able to break that out and say, here's the context of why this matters in these three different scenarios. If you're taking a course online and it breaks it out into this is why it matters to A, this is why it matters to B, this is why it matters to C. I can see it working kind of across the board. Yeah,
and there's probably a bit of an underlining tone as well with this. And again, I'm not saying anything that I don't think is particularly new or is new. It's that storytelling element that humans do resonate more and with stories, and it's easier to picture it in your mind when you're selling or even just explaining it like a story instead of a slideshow. Slide decks can still be a great facilitation tool to tell a story, but it's not as if it's one slide and now we move on to the next and now we move on to the next. Link the knowledge to the last section, and all of a sudden you've got a story that you're presenting, and therefore the learner is able to picture it so much clearly in their mind. So it's linking that last section, and now we move on to this. Now we've nailed this. Now we just could move on to this. So yeah, it's that start, middle, and end of a story that we would read at school, that we're going
Yeah.
to deliver to our kids when we're putting them to bed. It's no different in L&D, I think, that we should deliver our sessions as a story, not just what we want you to achieve out of it, but the content. Let's sell it as a story, because humans, as we know, and lots of research suggests it, that they do resonate with storytelling because it's easy to picture how to apply it.
Yeah, I can see this relating to something you posted about on LinkedIn. So if we're thinking like, this is the knowledge we want to deliver, we front load the context of this is where it matters. We tell a good story about how this kind of unfolds or builds. You mentioned on LinkedIn about cognitive activation and checking throughout sessions that
Yeah.
people are engaged in. And that when you said storytelling, it reminded me of that, because if you were telling a story to someone, you would pick up on cues about, are they checked out? You know, are they still listening to you? Can imagine that having those touch points to make sure people are still cognitively engaged or activated throughout a session is a key part of making sure the knowledge is delivered well.
Yeah, and 100%. And it's actually come to me while you were talking there that, that it's probably, I don't read comic books, but I love
Yeah.
the old DC, and who doesn't,
Yeah.
right? But I guess that, cognitive, I've done something recently as well, you might have seen it, where I've talked about cognitive overload. And that's simply just saying, what we said earlier about theory, too much information and it not going anywhere and not
Mm,
having the opportunity to apply it. You could liken it to cognitive overload being the nemesis, the enemy of the story, because
mm,
it's causing more harm than good. Whereas cognitive activation, that is not overload. That's actually giving the opportunity to the learner to apply it in real time and throughout the session, which is what we've discussed. So yeah, it's that hero mentality that activation comes in to save the day, because it's giving the opportunity to the learner to apply it continually and leave that classroom with momentum.
yeah. And just to build on that same post, actually, you mentioned about having pillars per session. I think that's a really great idea, just to make sure you're only getting across the key things, I'd imagine. So if we come into a session, how would that look like, setting some pillars that you want to get across and make sure it's not too much and it is digestible for a session?
Yeah, and I think that, again, I could unpack that so many different ways, but I think that goes back to it from my mindset. I think it seems to be going maybe in the workplace learning environment, just from my take, that workplace learning is going more into micro learning based, where it's content little and often. And we talked about TikTok style
Mm,
content. There's loads of examples out there anyway. But that pillars approach is kind of complementing what I'm thinking of. I'd like to deliver it over a series of sessions so that you can link the story. Let's not all cram it into one session, because it's not about that. It's not about overload. It's about selling you a story so that you can picture it in your mind as to how to use it. And instead of doing a 2 hour session, let's do, I don't know what, 6 15-minute sessions instead, where we
mm,
focus on a particular area over time and do it consistently over the next 6 weeks, say.
mm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. The way you're designing that is with one specific pillar in mind, and I guess that moving on to confidence, I guess that makes it easier to set ways to build confidence, because if you're only tackling one thing, imagine setting a measure, a method of building confidence and testing it becomes easier. And I guess even if you were doing a long session where you had pillars, you would be able to just set ways to test and enable confidence. But I guess going up a layer, tell us a bit about this in the classroom. How can we set these touch points that help people test and build confidence?
Well, touch points, obviously they can be in several guises, but touch points can be making it, I mean, look, fundamentally, again, I try not to overanalyze it or over theorize it in terms of the approach. And I've said about this recently, where frameworks are very helpful, but I don't like to go too educational about that. I
Yeah.
just want to keep it real with conversations. And if you're real with your audience, I think they resonate and buy into you. So how I would go about that as a touch point is just making it a conversation where, let's open it out to the room to start with as to what our thoughts are based on what I've initially told you. Set the scene that, guys, I'm going to mention and not pick on you, but I'm going to just call out certain people and get your views as well. It's a safe space. I'm not calling out you and I expect a certain answer, but making it a dialogue between you and the learner throughout the session, as opposed to it should be a back and forth where, now I've said this, what's your take on it? Because what I'm actually doing is I'm getting the learner to apply what I'm teaching them to their existing thought patterns. And when they're talking about it and sharing it themselves, it's the same as when we write things down. We see it in our own handwriting. It activates our brain, and it's a lot clearer when we start making notes. It's the same way if we start talking and continually verbalize and have a conversation with the learner throughout the session. Again, I think that just can be an organic touch point. It doesn't have to be after 15 minutes, I'm going to check for learning, of course, that always exists. I think it just can be normalized with, look, before we go on to the next section, what do we think about this? Or I can ask intentional questions based on my objectives. So if I know I've got an objective on a particular thing, guys, now I've opened up the room after this first bit, what do we think on X? So I'm being intentional because I'm activating. I've said about what our objectives are, but I want them to think, what do you think about that in the context of what we're trying to achieve here? But again, it's having a conversation, yes, but it's really what I feel I'm doing is making the learner think. And that's what we're here to do. We're encouraging them how to think, not teaching them what to think. It's encouraging people to, when they leave the classroom, they own their own learning journey. If they're talking about the topic, they're building confidence because they're holding a conversation with the person that's delivering the content. They do realise, oh, actually, I am getting it because I was able to share my point of view with Joe, who is giving the knowledge and who's leading the session. So that's a really, I think, organic way of just fostering low key confidence. Other ways are probably more obvious, where we can do quizzes and, Kahoots, who doesn't love one? We can throw in those at certain points and certain checkpoints. But I think going back to my way of being, authentic, having an authentic approach, you can plan and do all your session plans for all sorts of learning strategy for all sessions.
Yeah.
But if we overplan, we lose that authenticity, and we're too rigid in our approach, and maybe we're not reading the reactions of the room because we've stuck too much to a rigid plan. So I have like some bite-sized things that I know what I want to achieve every session. I kind of bullet point it. It represents on my slide deck, but what I'm really interested in is making sure that I'm facilitating a conversation with the group. So I think, look, it's a very long-winded answer. I appreciate that, Gary, but because it's a hard one to unpack and put into context. But I would say, as a touch point, back to your question, just have organic conversations and read the room. It goes back to that emotional intelligence. That if you can see the room are starting to check out, if you're seeing a bit of foot tapping, bring them into the audience and think, guys, what do you think on this? That way they know that they're not just going to be lectured and talked to throughout. They know, wow, Joe actually has asked me what my points of view are. I maybe need to stay sharp because he's going to actually ask me on my opinion. That low key, again, is a way to bring them and make sure that they don't check out.
Yeah, I can really see the benefit of checking for understanding and giving a chance to apply it in the moment to build confidence in the ability to do something. Because if I think about, we had a event last year where we had one of our SMEs come in and did a session on networking, and one activity we had to do was, I think it was 5 or 7 minutes of speaking. Well, you're not speaking at all, someone is speaking at you, and you just have to listen for 7 minutes, and then you swapped, and then you spoke for 7 minutes, and the other person just had to listen. And if I didn't do it there and then, I wouldn't have done it after. And if I didn't do it there and then, I wouldn't have realized that listening is hard, but I can do it. Because most people aren't having that situation where they're forced to, or not forced, but they're encouraged to not do something they're so used to doing. So that was a real thing for me. It's like, this did give me confidence that I could just listen without speaking at all, because we did an exercise of it in real time. And it was quite good as well. She was going around the room, reading the room, seeing where people were getting stuck. So I can really see why testing and enabling confidence in real time as a huge benefit moving forward.
Yeah, look, thanks for sharing that. That's good to. I've been involved in similar activities like that, and it's very hard to keep my mouth shut for 7 minutes. I mean, I'm a great. Well, I'm not going to say I'm a great listener. That sounds a bit pig-headed, but I love to listen. I absolutely, implore that approach of you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. But the point I was just going to mention off the back of that, and probably just broadly of what we've been speaking about recently. We talk about it in L&D, I think, a lot. I certainly have this view anyway, that, L&D, training and development, whatever we want to call ourselves, training consultants, etc., knowledge. L&D is about knowledge sharing and knowledge exchanges. It's an exchange of knowledge, right? Whether it's in school, college, university, workplace learning. So all I'm really doing with my conversational approach is it's a conversational exchange as well as a knowledge exchange. So I'm just going one step further with, I'm going to share knowledge by way of an exchange of knowledge, by way of a slide deck, but let's get an exchange going by way of our conversations for me to understand if you're understanding it, but also I want to see it from your take, because 2 plus 2 equals 4, but so does 3 plus 1. I could be going at it from one way, but have I activated something in your mind that you've realised you've seen it from a different way? That can then allow me to pivot if I need to as the trainer.
No, it makes complete sense because I think you framed it as well as allowing people to visualize what success looks like after. And, we might be both coming to the number 4 through 2 and 2 and 3 plus 1, but I think it's probably about people seeing that whatever way they apply or think they could apply what you're delivering on the day.
Yep. And they've got to be able to visualize. And I do believe in manifestation to a degree, but what I sincerely believe about is execution. That knowledge has got to go somewhere. But, it starts with them building that confidence of, actually, I can see it because Joe's delivering it in a way where he's bringing me into it. I'm able to apply what he's teaching me. So there's an element of visualization, but you have to facilitate the opportunity for them to execute at some point. So visualization probably only goes so far, but you have to create an environment where they feel that they can execute, and that starts by them being able to visualize, and that then starts with the conversations that I'm having. So it's a bit of a domino effect, I guess.
Yeah. And you mentioned, like a tip that was in your LinkedIn post that probably helped people build in touch points is just after each section asking the thought-provoking question, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
How would you use this now that we've gone through it? And I think sometimes that you're baking it into whatever you're presenting or delivering. I think just, if we've got pillars of what we're talking about, then let's add that touch point after each one to ask the right question.
Yeah, look, I've done basic customer service, advanced customer service, intermediate customer service training throughout the years, and I've spoke about, we've probably all done it. We talked about the power of open questions: the who, what, when, where, how, why. Why would we not then do that in our conversations with people that attend our sessions? Because if it facilitates a conversation between you and a customer where it's overcoming a problem and you're fact finding, why on earth would I not do that as a facilitator when I'm training people and understanding it from their place? So yeah, I think just again, open conversation, open questions. We talk about it in training when we're delivering skills like soft skills. Why don't we do that in our approach as well, to open up the room so that they really leave the room with understanding of, actually, I did get it and Joe brought me in by way of conversation. I saw it myself. I'm going to carry on this when I leave the room.
Yeah. Well, that leads us nicely to momentum. So if someone's built that bit of confidence and they can see how it might work for them post-session, how do we capitalize on that and build that momentum?
I suppose for the want of wanting to explain it probably a little bit more of a more advanced way, is arguably a challenging part, because maybe you're not as involved with this, because maybe the momentum is more about what happens after the session when they're not in the room with you. I would say, just using a very generic example, that, I've trained as a cohort, they've got the knowledge, some confidence has been built, and they have left the room with some momentum that they do get it, and they're going to take that momentum moving forward. I've taken my first live call and I've spoken to a customer. Wow, I do get it. I've not had to wait to leave the classroom to do my first call. I've done it in the safe space of a training room. So I'm leaving with momentum. My reliance as a trainer, and this is probably where we need to be more strategic, and these conversations I know are happening in L&D and have done for some time, it's then the relationship we as trainers have and facilitators have with the management team of where those agents go back to. They live out the momentum itself. We create the momentum and we can carry that on when they're in the classroom with us. And there's things that we can do while they're out of the classroom, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But I guess the real momentum is the legacy of the session. Are we giving people the opportunities to apply that knowledge when they go back to their roles? They're going to get it in the classroom, but that's not enough. That's that's the first spark for the fire. We're going to get that in the classroom, but I'm reliant on my strategy being lived out by way of the manager. So that's probably on me. Well, that is on me for making sure that, I've made clear that what the guys have delivered, my handover, I'm going to give that to the manager. They have had this. Please, can you ensure that they have continue opportunities to do that? Because that's going to continue the momentum. But, in the classroom and what we own, that momentum comes from a natural consequence of gaining that confidence of doing the role. The momentum is that they've left the room actually already applying the knowledge, and they can visualize, I can do it because I've done it in a smaller capacity. All I'm going to do is double down when I go back to my chair and with my manager's support and with Joe in the background. One thing I'll come back to as well, where I said there is things that we can do when we're not in the classroom and we're not speaking to managers. One thing I often say, and I do this in my current role, and I've done it probably, well, I have done it quite a lot throughout several roles, but certainly in my current position, I'm often phrasing the thing or phrasing the point of knowledge shouldn't be just about it or being an opportunity when you're in the training room. It should be that it's accessible to you when you're not in the classroom. And a simple way of doing that is content libraries, making content accessible to people. Now, I know there's some arguments with content libraries that if it's not communicated and marketed in the right way, then people disengage and don't use it. Also, if it has to be 65 clicks before I get to the one document that I want, so the uniformity of it is a big thing as well. So I've been very conscious of that. But I've done something simple where I've integrated a folder for all of the departments that I work with within Microsoft Teams, because it's a communications channel that you use daily. All I'm saying is, guys, with all of the resources that we have covered in this session, you are going to be you have accessibility to it. Because and again, this is where I'm real with the learners. I will say it in a way, look, I want to treat you like adults, and I want you to have the opportunity to find these resources yourself. Because sometimes it doesn't need to be a training session. Sometimes it's just about knowing where to find the answer. And also, I want to encourage that behaviour in the learner when they leave the session, that they're being self-directed in their journey. They've left with momentum, so let's carry that on by giving them the tools or giving them a route to find the tools that they need. So I'm just making any content that I go through with them or anything that I find when we're not in the training room, I'm telling staff, guys, there is a specific folder for your team where I'm going to be continually uploading the content that you've gone through with me today, but there will also be additional content that I will give you as well for you to read through. So it's making it, again, an environment where people can continually learn, not in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And that naturally, I think, fosters the momentum from that side too. But it is a relationship you have with other people to make sure the momentum stays.
Yeah. We talk a lot about context in these episodes, and that feels like you have to understand the context of what is going to happen to someone when they go back to their day-to-day job, and where do they work and where are they going to look for information. Because to your point, if there's friction post the session, then the momentum will fizzle out a lot quicker. If you've understood how that person's acting day to day, where they turn for information, what the manager's behavior is like, and how you can make sure there's less friction for them so that they can enable people. So I think, that point you made there about where is the best place to reach these people and how do I make sure there's no friction when they go to that place so they do still feel empowered rather than blocked by the process of trying to build on a momentum.
Yeah, and look, totally agree. But we're also in an age, and it's nothing new. We've been in this age for quite some time now, in the grand scheme of things, where content, it's not the generation of content that's the problem anymore. We've arguably got too much content, and it's knowing the right content and at the right time. But it still draws for me an underlining point of it still needs to be accessible to people. They choose their option as to what they feel that's needed for them, resources wise, out of the classroom, but I can give them some added steer when they're in the classroom with me. But content is so widely accessible to people by way of platforms such as Spotify, podcasting, which is great, knowledge resources, e-learning, it's still hanging in there, e-learning. Even so, there's so many factors about it, but for me, fundamentally, it's about making sure that the resources are accessible to the learner. They don't have to just attend my session to get the content. We can really double down and go into it in greater detail. Of course we can, but I want there to be an element where they're empowered to own their own journey as well. Because they've got that spark from the session that they've left with that momentum from me. So I want that journey to continue. And the best way I can go about it, broadly speaking, is, making that content accessible. But having the buy-in with other people is another factor, of course.
Yeah. To pull out something else from your post that I really liked, you had this idea of a 48-hour accountability trigger. So you're sending something bite-sized and small that people can then use to ensure there's application of the thing they did rather than them kind of forgetting about it. And I really like that idea because that feels like the sweet spot. I've done the session, go back to my job for a couple of days. If then an email came through to me or a Slack message or a Teams message that said, here's a way you can apply that thing we did a couple of days ago in a 15-minute window and just reinforce what you learned on the day.
And that's it. You can play that in a lot of different ways, but again, with the fundamental logic that I'm applying there is that we can train all the content out, we can smash the knowledge, the confidence and the momentum, but I think it's necessary then to set a task or a challenge, not like as in it's in a coursework, it's a module, you must complete this by X, Y and Z, but you want to send the people away with a message where I want you to try this out. Again, I think a lot of people generally, from my experience, tend to respond really well when they get set a task. Now we've gone through this, guys. What I want you to do as a legacy of this session is this. It's not going to be that I want you to do it in X time frame. Right? Don't look at it that way. It's me just giving you some steer that now we've gone through this content. This is how I want you to apply it. And then before you know it, you'll start to own that journey because you'll realize how it helps you. So I think it's just giving someone a task afterwards where they respond to that. It's like, people working under someone. When you empower your team members, when you start to delegate tasks to them, because they feel, wow, that my boss must trust me because they're giving me a task to own. It's the same sort of thinking that I'm thinking here when I ask them to leave the classroom or when the session's over. I'm essentially delegating them a task because I feel that they've got it and I want them to use it when they're outside of the classroom, not just here. So there's a few things going on there. I'm empowering them. I'm sending them away with a really good message that actually, great, that really went well, but I might struggle as to how to apply that in real world. Well, let me give you a message and a task to give you some straight and narrow to go into. That could be something I've approved with the manager, but yeah, something done within the 48 hours. It's just ensuring that activation stays sharp and that they're using the knowledge, not just using it in the classroom, they're actually using it to their benefit. Because the last thing we want in L&D is to be considered tick box.
Yeah.
Something I do as well at the moment as well, just very quickly, is we do daily questions within my current workforce where it's an AI tool. Had to squeeze in AI at some point here, didn't I?
We made it 28 minutes or so it's not bad.
Yeah, and look, it is ultimately a check for learning, but what
Yeah.
we're saying, is that, guys, when you go through this training with us, the content that we've gone through, albeit a slide deck, a Word document, a cheat sheet, the resources that we've exposed you to in the training room, you're actually going to receive questions in the following days by way of this tool that we send to staff. So they just get a pop-up every single day with 2 daily questions being sent to them. The AI element is it can study the document and it can produce questions based on the content that I upload to it. So that's another activation thing and a task that happens within the next couple of days or weeks that follow the session. Guys, you've gone through the content, but to give you a little prompt and a reminder, you're going to get some questions. It's not designed to catch you out. It's there just to reinforce the knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's great. If we combine those two things together, we spoke about repetition of exposure to the information, and we also spoke about confidence being built through this kind of low stakes or staggered approach to doing it. And I think if you've got those two things working in tandem, you get a couple of questions every day that surface the information to you and force you to think about it maybe in your context, and you get a task that doesn't feel like it's also there to catch you out. It's a way to help you build on the confidence from the session. I can see how baking these things in before a session allows you to ensure that momentum isn't something that you lose control of, or it fizzles out because you've not taken those steps to create an environment where momentum can be sustained, I suppose.
Yeah, and look, that 48-hour task that I suggested in the LinkedIn post that you've mentioned, it is ultimately what I've mentioned about that 2 daily question approach. It's about reinforcement, and I think at that reinforcement stage of knowledge, I think you're breeding new thoughts. With reinforcement, that's the time where the learner starts to realise, actually, I've got the baseline knowledge of what I went through with Joe in the classroom. A couple of days later, I've had this reinforcement and this reminder. Now I'm starting to think in my own way and how I'd use it. So reinforcement, I think, is the activation of them starting to think how they would use it in their current ways of thinking themselves. You can do that when they're in the classroom, but it can potentially be too early because they're still understanding the base of the knowledge. But at reinforcement, a couple of hours, a couple of days afterwards, that's where I think the sweet spot is for them to now start thinking, I've had that little prompt. That's given me an idea for that, because thoughts create new thoughts, right? It's a compounding effect. So that's also another really, probably not low key, but I suppose in my head it is, but it's another under the radar way that you're fostering momentum culturally in the business, but fundamentally within the learner, that they carry on the knowledge that you gave them, and that it does actually cause a proper change in terms of behaviour and performance.
Brilliant. Cool. I love these kind of simple frameworks. That I use them all the time in marketing as well. And what I'm always interested in, especially when I think about the way I think about my role, is like, where does this belief come from? How have your experiences kind of led you to this position where you think, you know what, this 3-step process is going to be helpful? What kind of experiences that shaped that?
Yeah, I mean, formally I've been in L&D for about 7 years. But really, my early instances of training was I used to be a personal trainer.
Okay.
I actually thought about this morning. It was actually almost 20 years to the day that I began my journey of being a personal trainer. So I was fresh out of college, done my sports qualifications, fast approaching 18. That's a little plug for how old I actually am. But yeah, that was my first instances of going into training, and that's never really left me going into being in the sports world. And I just remember from making it a conversation instead of when I always loved the education part of when I was training someone physically, to run a marathon, and it was only because of an injury that I stopped that world of work. I went into some other lines of work, but I basically left training for a while, but I knew I always wanted to come back into L&D. But when I came back into L&D, I suppose looking back now, that way of delivering experiences and creating momentum so that people can own their own journey moving forward, it probably came from that world of sport that I was in a little while back. Outside of that as well, it's been just from being an attendee of several terrible training sessions where, and I mean it in the sense terrible training. The people were lovely, never any issue with the person delivering it. It was more just it was an overload of theory. You never had any opportunity to apply it. It was endless theory. They didn't link the knowledge. They didn't give you the reasons as to why I suppose it's all of the things that I saw that just didn't help me, and I saw it around me. I thought, there's the gap, and it already speaks to what I want to do as well. So it was kind of a marriage where it just came together from previous experience of being in a different industry, the passion to want to get back into it. Cut me open, I'll bleed L&D, I really will.
Yeah.
And just seeing where it's gone wrong and just making it really sensible of what can we do to correct that issue. Let's solve the issue by not doing that moving forward and making it more an experience for the learners.
Yeah.
So in short, that's probably a good way of how that's came to be.
Yeah, I can really, now you mentioned the kind of background in personal training, I can really see how that works, the knowledge, confidence, momentum, because it's one thing knowing how to do an exercise, but having the confidence to perform it is another thing, and then having the momentum to sustain continued exercise over time. So I completely understand.
Because you only get your induction right, and then it sounds a bit of a savage way of saying it, but ultimately, you move on to your next induction, but ultimately you're trusting the person, and in a way, also the person going to the gym probably wants to own their own journey as well.
Yeah.
They don't want a personal trainer hanging off them all the time. Obviously, certain exceptional circumstances when they're being trained for a marathon or Mr. Universe, that's a bit different. But I trained people where I was trying to empower them to own their own journey. Of course, I wanted to make sure that they had the right form, they didn't injure themselves, but they were going on the journey. They were coming into the gym to want to lose weight, to run a marathon. I did all those things, but it was necessary to create a baseline for them so that they got the knowledge of what they needed to do for these reps, how to perform it. They got confidence from doing it, but they own their own journey and they took that momentum moving forward. So it's probably, as I think, it just landed that way. I don't think I looked at my sport background and landed it on that. It's just organically. And as we talk now, I'm probably thinking
reflecting on
probably a big part of where it came from.
Yeah.
So thank you for awakening the beast there. Yeah.
That's all right. Good. I always think that as well, like reflecting on, you don't really realize how your view has been shaped at the time, but then you kind of looking back, you do notice. And I completely agree with having a bad experience of something makes you realize that there's a better way to do it. And I hear that countless times from people, people who've started businesses in L&D, people who then got into L&D because they saw that there was more potential for how something could be done better than how it's been done now. So it's
that's business, right? You either innovate and you create a brand new market, a brand new product, a brand new tool, or you innovate on the existing one. That's, I suppose, very simplistically put, and I don't profess to be Steve Jobs or any kind of or Jeff Bezos, but I think fundamentally it's the same things here. That if you can see something going wrong, rectify it as to what your solution is, or if there's a gap for innovation, don't be afraid to test and iterate.
Yeah. Brilliant. Joe, we're coming close to the end of our time. So I just wanted to get some final thoughts. If anyone else is struggling with challenges around making their sessions applicable, building momentum, building confidence, what would be your final advice for those people?
Yeah, look, trainer to trainer. First and foremost, persevere. You're onto something. You've got to live your own vision. While there's a lot of similarities within the world of education, I don't want to just say L&D, education broadly in all different aspects and contexts. Persevere with your own methodology. You'll get the wins, but take the feedback. Be agile, so adapt where the plan doesn't go necessarily to plan. Work with people, don't suffer in silence. If you're struggling, reach out to people, bounce ideas. You spoke about networking earlier. LinkedIn, I'm going to be its biggest champion, maybe second only to yourself. But I think, broadly, maybe go into just a bit more of detail of networking. Network with people outside of your own industry. Don't get too boxed into your own world of L&D, the products that you've delivered training on, or the types of things. Go maybe on the flip side of it as well, and just get a sense of what the common denominators and common similarities are. And also, by reaching out to other people in a different industry that is in the same box of you as L&D, it just gives you different aspects. It gives you different food for thought. It gives you solutions to the problems that you're experiencing at the moment. Sometimes it's necessary to have completely different thinking thrown at you than being told, this is the right idea. Sometimes you need to be challenged for you to realise actually you are onto something. So that's what I would say about being with the networking. Really, really focus on making sure that you get into other conversations with people outside of the industry that you're in at the moment. And talking to my experience of Six Sigma, being an agile, keeping an agile mindset, just keep a growth mindset in terms of you don't have all the answers. Learning and development professionals, despite what the common belief might be, we don't have all the answers. We're just the people that can deliver the education. We don't know the answers. We have to learn the content before we train it. So we are learners just like you. So if you don't have all the knowledge and you're struggling with that and you're worried that you're coming across that way with your learners, remember that Phil Collins lyric where it says, in learning you will teach and in teaching you will learn. Great film, Tarzan. Probably not the standard advice that you would get. I could probably unpack it in so many different ways, but at its core, those would be my big things to give people a steer on.
Yeah, brilliant. I don't think there's any better way to end than on Phil Collins. As a fan of Phil Collins myself, and I also went to see a Phil Collins tribute band not too long ago, and let me tell you, it was brilliant. So
Can't knock it. Can't knock it. Yeah, I'm gonna put my fist in my mouth and not try to squeeze in a pun. I would so go there, but I can feel it coming in the air. Oh,
yeah. Joe, you mentioned LinkedIn, so I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the description as well, because there's a lot of great stuff you're sharing about practical advice for people in terms of running sessions and facilitation. And just a big thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, and just additionally, Gary, love what you're doing here as well. L&D for L&D, so I'm only going to be more than happy to share its message as well to other professionals in the industry. So keep at it.
Lovely, brilliant. Thank you, Joe.